let me then. Yeah. So as you could hear, I have just started recording the webinar as the official deliverable of our working group. So in case that someone is not flexible or relaxed with showing up on the recording, I hope you will be okay with this in terms of maybe keeping your camera off and so on. But if you would also like to make sure that your name does not appear anywhere, just email us after the event and we will do our best to satisfy, of course, everyone's preferences. So good afternoon and welcome to this webinar on intersectionality, which is organized as part of the cross-cutting activity of Cost Association, which is dealing with career development for young researchers. This webinar will explore how intersectionality shapes career trajectories for young researchers. It will acknowledge the complex and overlapping social identities that have an impact on opportunities, challenges, and experiences faced by researchers at the beginning of their careers. For insightful discussions and real-world case studies by our distinguished speakers, you will gain a deeper understanding of the role of intersectionality in research careers, especially those of young researchers. The session will also examine the broader policy implications, offering actionable strategies for fostering equity and diversity in research environments. Together with our topic, we will also make sure to give you additional information about the activities of our working group within this cross-cutting activity as a whole. So we'll actually start with that. So I will first invite Ms. Judith Litjens from Cost Association. She is affiliated there as policy advisor to address us for several minutes and to give us an overview of this CCA on career development for young researchers, to give us the context of the environment in which this webinar is taking place.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry I was muted there for a moment. Good afternoon and also welcome from my side. I'm Judith Litjens. I'm a cost policy advisor and in that capacity responsible for coordinating this exciting cost initiative. It's a top-down initiative that we've introduced last year, a cross-cutting activity on supporting the career development for young researchers. And as Adna explained, this webinar here today is one of the deliverables of the CCA. And it's in fact the first deliverable, which makes this an extra exciting occasion. So it is being produced as we speak. And it is my real pleasure to introduce to you very briefly the CCA, what it means and what we're trying to achieve as a bit of background information. But I will not take up too much of your time. I'll just give a very brief presentation. So if you bear with me a moment, I have a few slides.
Can you share? I think I allowed it.
Yes, I'm trying to at the moment. Let me know if you can see it. Okay.
Yes, excellent.
Yes, okay. Very good. So the CCA was, sorry, can you hear me? Yes.
Sorry. Yes.
Okay. Yes, all good.
Okay, very good. So the CCA was introduced last year, 2024. In December, we had our launch event. And as I mentioned, it's a top-down initiative. So for those of you who are familiar with COST, you will know that we fund COST actions. These are research networks that are all bottom-up. So the topics and the way they work fully defined by researchers and innovators. So the CCA is our only top-down initiative where COST decides on the topic of a cross-cutting importance, let's say, in the research arena. And for this CCA, we're focusing on supporting career development for young researchers and innovators in Europe. And we focus on the following three key activities. So first of all, we want to create a community of practice. And this is the network, the CCA network that we've created. And I'll come back to that in just a moment with one of the next slides. And this community of practice, the idea is that they share examples of good practices in meetings, events, also webinars. And the network will then analyze the factors which do or do not enable transferability of good practices to other countries. And finally, we want to explore, the network wants to explore how to develop and implement better and more consistent HR strategies across Europe. These are, very broadly speaking, the objectives. And around these objectives, we have organized 4 working groups, and that you see on the slide here. And today, of course, we are listening to one of the outcomes of the 4th working group, Gender Equity and Fostering Diversity in Research. So how does it work? The network is structured around 2 sub-networks, if you like. So there's a core network that consists of 2 co-chairs. The network is chaired by Dr. Nicola Dengo and Dr. Joanna Rutkowska. And they are affiliated to Eurodoc, both of them. And then we have a group of young researchers and career advisors, and together they form the core network. We also have a wider network, and the idea is that these key stakeholders contribute to the vision and strategic outlook of the CCA. So here you can see the countries on the slide that are represented. We bring together a total of 21 countries, including 14 young researchers, and we have 21 career advisory experts in the network with us. And these are our key stakeholders that are part of the wider network, and they're meant to help us disseminate the outputs and the outcomes of the CCA. If you want to read more about it, I can recommend having a look at our activity plan, which outlines the objectives and activities of the CCA, and in particular, the one-pager. So every working group has put together a one-pager giving an overview of their objectives, but also their activities and deliverables. So what are they going to do in this period of 2 years' time? Because this is the running time of the CCA. It runs until December 2026. And this is the time frame during which these activities will be carried out, that you can find in the activity plan. And as I mentioned, this is a very exciting moment for us to present to you the first CCA deliverable with the webinar today. And then I will finalize with just a quick overview of what's next. So we have our summer meeting with the network next week and in Brussels at the COS premises. Then there's the midterm conference coming up in December. And please watch this space for more CCA deliverables. And if you would like more information, there's our webpage as well dedicated to the CCA on the COST website. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much. And happy to answer any questions later on. But for now, I'll give the floor back to you, Adna. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now like to introduce Dr. Verity Elston, who is co-chairing the Working Group 4 on Gender Equity and Fostering Diversity together with me. And she will take over the moderation of the second part of the webinar. As Judith already introduced you the CCA in general, I would like to share with you just a few objectives of our working group in order to better understand the choice of the topic that we did for today. So our idea here is the necessity and need to approach the career growth of early career researchers from the perspective of equity and diversity as an encompassing term, which will integrate gender equality with other modes to combat forms of difference-based discrimination, and with the goal to ensure recognition, respect, and value of all members of the research community. The further information about this working group, as well as other 3 working groups within the CCA, can be found in the one-pagers, which Judith already mentioned. In the group chat, I will share the link for the Cost Association announcement of this CCA. And also after the webinar, we will try our best to communicate these materials with you. Also, I could see in chat that there was a question about getting the presentation slides after the webinar, and this is another thing that we will do our best to collect and to share with you as well, to actually let you know how you can access those. However, it will be best to stay in touch with the Cost Association website and LinkedIn profile, where you will be able to follow further updates. Without further ado, I would like to take us to our first plenary talk, which is Introduction to Intersectionality by Dr. Anne-Sophie Godefroy. She is an associate professor of philosophy at Paris East Créteil University. I will probably butcher all French names. I'm sorry for that in advance. And she's also a researcher affiliated with the Republic of Knowledge Research Unit. Her academic work focuses on the epistemology of social sciences, comparative methodologies, and the sociology of science, with a particular emphasis on gender studies. She has contributed significantly to the understanding of how scientific norms and institutional structures influence gender inequalities in academic and technological fields. Her research often combines qualitative and quantitative methods to explore the complexities of science in society. She is the chair of the Cost Action Voices, CA 2137, where it aims to build an inclusive academic culture by amplifying the voices of women and underrepresented groups in science, which is how she also became a valuable member of our working group as well. She has led and participated in several major European projects focused on gender dynamics in STEM. She also regularly contributes to international conferences and is widely published in the field, with notable work such as Women in Engineering and Technology Research and Gender and Interdisciplinary Education for Engineers. Anne-Sophie, could you please take over the microphone and give us your presentation?
Thank you for the very kind introduction. So I start sharing the screen to present the slides we have prepared with Victoria. So I hope. Okay, so let's start. So no use, I think, to remind you the schedule. So introduction to the webinar, it has been done, and I move now to an introduction to intersectionality. So intersectionality as a concept was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, as you probably know, in an essay which title is Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, a Black feminist critique of anti-discrimination doctrine, feminist theory, and anti-racist politics. And she was herself a lawyer, and the ideas behind the essay are the fact that...
Poi li metto nel random effect come slope.
What happens?
Fuori
Yes, so the basic idea is that feminists tend to talk about white women, Black movements tend to talk about Black men, and Black women remain invisible. So you have people who are at the intersection of different groups and who are invisible or who are in the margins. So it's about Black women, and it's also about invisibility, margins, and power relations. Now, if we try to see how intersectionality is interpreted in a European context, it is slightly different, I think. So it is most of the time understood as a tool to address what is named intersecting inequalities. And in many research programs, it is understood as gender plus, which is sometimes exactly the name. So it means that the first focus was gender inequalities, and some other dimensions were added. as disability, social background, age, sex, family situation, geographical origin, sexual orientation, religion, etc., etc. So as you see, it's not sex, class, and race. You have many more dimensions. Another specificity of the European context is the fact that many countries are color blindness, first for legal reasons, but not only, also for cultural reasons or even conceptual reasons. So if I take the example of France, so race is not considered as a scientific concept. So you cannot work with it in an academic way. It's very difficult. So you need to go through other concepts as racialized, for example, racialized people, but you cannot translate and reuse the conceptual framework built in the US or in the UK. In addition, there is no systematic data collection on race in most countries for legal reasons because of World War II. So the idea is that if you cannot collect data on race or religion or that kind or sexual orientation, you don't have the list of people you could deport or send to camps in case an authoritarian regime comes to power. So which is a good reason, but at the same time, we have no regular and systematic data collection. This said, surveys are possible, and so that it's not true that it's impossible to study, but there is no, so in each time you fill an administrative form, you will not tick the box about your race. The only box you tick usually is gender. Another difficulty, the fact that there is no harmonized data collection except for gender. If I take, for example, the social background, so it is addressed in some countries, but not the same way. So it's very difficult to use, so there is no harmonization, even for gender. So in some cases you have a third option, but not in all countries and all forms. Yes, and in the different possible dimensions are more or less sensitive from a place to another. For example, the issue of social background is not sensitive in France, and everybody is okay to speak about it, but race is extremely sensitive, same as religion. So in other countries, maybe religion is not sensitive at all, but social background is. So that's and I will finish with a criticism that could be made to intersectionality in a European context. So it is the fact that maybe we are whitening the concept and we tend to put race in the background and not in the foreground, as it was the case initially in the works of Kimberly Crenshaw or other. So then you asked me how race, gender, socioeconomic status, disability, and other identities intersect to influence professional opportunities in research. That's a very difficult question, and I have no complete answer. We have separate studies of the different dimensions we have already mentioned. So for example, for gender, it is very well documented. We have the she figure every 3 years, many studies, and you all know the scissors diagram. For socioeconomic status, we have a long research tradition in France, but not only. I mentioned France because that's the authors I know better. and we have a lot of data collection on that, and a long research tradition and life stories, etc. On disability, there are different ways of addressing disability from a country to another, but I'm not sure there is a systematic survey on disability and professional opportunities in research. Sexual orientation, same, I don't know if there is a study. Regarding race, so we have studies in France, for example, about the selection for entry to master's program, and it clearly shows that there is a discrimination. Yes, and I also wanted to mention a big survey in France named Trajectories and Origins, with different waves of survey. And if you look at the education or the employment chapter, you will have something about the impact of origins on education and employment trajectories. But there is no systematic intersection with gender. So we have the different, we can find, but very, very few studies combine at least 2 dimensions in the list. This said, we have many case studies and experience demonstrating that inequality is reinforced in each other, but in many different ways and with great complexity, as Victoria will show through case studies in the next part. And there is not much data, and of course more research is needed to substantiate those facts. So in Voices, I should have mentioned it, but we have studied life trajectories, and so we have a series of stories, but it's very difficult to move from stories to systematic data collection, or because for the moment it does not exist. So an example of systematic barriers and biases impacting researchers. So I based that slide on the 2 small research projects we are now doing with Victoria. So the idea is to use focus group with students at PhD level or postdoc, Black students in France and in UK in one of the projects, the UCL one, and racialized students from former from the former colonial empires for France, UK, Spain, and Portugal, which is another type of focus group. So you have our names there. So the first, the very, very first outcomes of this study. So the first thing is that those young scholars are victims of bias and prejudices, and they tend to be suspected to be less competent than the others. So they always have to prove their competence, which is not required for the others. Especially in the case of Spain and Portugal, so they have the experience, I don't know how to say it, but they speak Spanish or Portuguese with an accent from Latin America. And because of that, they are not taken seriously. They also mention, and that's especially the case for Spain and Portugal, the fact that because they are racialized, there is an imaginary of the sexualization of La Latina and ideas like that. And so they are at risk of gender-based violence much more than other female scholars. They also mention, of course, lack of support, loneliness, lack of knowledge of the trade, because you have many implicit things in academic careers. So I don't know if you have question and answers, or it was in our outline, so that's why I'm asking. But if not, we can we can move on.
We were planning to start the Q&A after both of your presentations are done, if you both agree with that.
So I'll move to the next slide, but now it's Victoria, but she's not in the, I don't know what happened. So I go to
So in order to avoid any disruptions during the presentations from our speakers, the participants will be able to raise their hand and ask questions after the presentations are done. So we decided to keep the meeting format of this Zoom call so that everyone can contribute in writing or by asking questions. But as I said, after the presentations are done. So while we are waiting,
so Victoria is back. Okay.
While we are waiting, just before the presentation, I'd like to briefly introduce our second speaker. So as you can see, the second part of the talk will be on the topic of case histories, bringing intersectionality to life. And the talk will be given by Dr. Victoria Shavuni, who is the Vice Dean EDI and Associate Professor at University College London at the Institute of Education. Her interests are gender, identity, and race through the lens of intersectionality, focusing on leadership and the lived experience of young Black women and girls. Victoria develops fresh conceptual frameworks focusing on equity and social justice, especially the interplay between people and the sophistication of behaviors which lead to disengagement with the promotion of equality. Her work shows how culture and cultural background have the potential to disrupt power structures and lead to transformational change. Her more recent projects include Gender and Leadership in Higher Education in Pakistan, capturing the voices of BME PhD students funded through the Liberating Curriculum, and Black Girls, Young Black Women's Experiences in Education. These projects have led to publications in peer-reviewed journals and informed book chapters. She has also been commissioned to write a co-authored book with Carol Tomlin entitled Managing Everyday Racism, and an edited book, the Bloomsbury Gender Handbook on Educational Leadership and Management. Victoria, if you could please address us with your talk, we are here to listen to you. Okay.
Okay, now it's
We have you back. Great.
Right, okay, brilliant, thank you. So some good news to begin with, which I think would be really helpful, is that I've just been promoted to full professor. So
Congratulations.
that was just this week, so it's just public knowledge now. So I thought it would be really nice to mention that. So yeah, I'm going to be spending a little bit of time on case histories and bringing intersectionality to life. Now, I recognise we've got a very limited amount of time, so I'll do my best in that time to be able to give some examples of the work that we actually do. I'm going to start off with the presentation of the real-world case study demonstrating intersectionality in researcher career development. Now, even with that, I needed to make sure. So I'm just trying to think, is it going to move? Sorry, just trying to. Oh, now it's moved. Okay. Right. Okay. Sorry, we're just trying to. Right. Okay. So the one I'm going to look at is women's experiences across 5 universities in Pakistan. This was a really interesting, and I chose this one out of many examples I could have given. This was a project which was funded by the British Council within the UK, and I worked alongside the PI, and myself was a co-PI, was for, she was based in the University of Leicester and I'm based in UCL. So, and we also had a PI, which was part of the project as well in Pakistan. So the first aspect of it is that I didn't come from Pakistan, I'd never been in Pakistan. And my colleague was from Pakistan and grew up in Pakistan and was a dean in a university before she came to the UK. And when she came to the UK, she had to start from the beginning again. So she was the PI and I was a co-PI, and we had another co-PI there as well. The whole project was really looking at women's academics careers and how they were progressing within 5 universities. We looked at the intersectional identities because it was going to be a intergenerational project, which looked at early career researchers, so people who were just doing their doctorate, people which are on postdocs, people which were mid-cycle of their academics, as academics, and also senior academics as well. And we wanted to really kind of explore the culture where women are traditionally regarded as inferior to men. But I came in with an open mind. I'd never been to Pakistan as a researcher, and I you know, as like many of us, we think about what the media perhaps says, but we also have to put that to one side. So as women academics in a culture where women are traditionally regarded as inferior to men, I wanted to go in there with an open mind. My particular area was to involve to look at the research process from 2 different sides. One side was from the women in Pakistan, and the other side was from ourselves in the UK. But what I didn't want is for us to be able to tell the other side, which is a Pakistani side, that we were better than them. We wanted to do it as a 2-way process. One of the areas, though, is that we knew that the piece which I was working on, which was to design the research methodology, was that many of our students and our colleagues within Pakistan were used to doing quantitative research, and I was very much a qualitative. So we were going to do a mixed method approach to being able to catch this particular work. So if I stop there for a moment and then say the next bit, the women did. This is just a point to note, really. Women did not have to struggle to assert themselves. The ones which I was working with were from 2 very well-known universities within Pakistan, which were female universities, so universities for women, and also 3 co-ed universities as well. Now, in this particular one, they didn't have to struggle to assert themselves because the universities were single-sex universities, and they were easily able to develop their careers as early researchers. That wasn't a barrier for them within the work itself. Women in the co-educational institutions encountered more obstacles to progression. So as I was starting to say, we had to do I designed a mixed method approach across those 5 universities, not knowing what it was going to be like in the particular facility, and developed groups. There were 30 women who were part of this particular work, and we had to really kind of put them in groups to be able to ensure that they understood what each of us were doing. The intersectional aspects were you had different people which were there. You had young women which have just started to be involved with the particular area. We also had women which were top academics who had decided not to have children, but the pressure of not having children, but they were also supporting their communities because of being professors. We also had young women which were for the first time had their first child, but they wanted to continue with their studies, and they brought their husbands with them. So you had all these kind of dynamics which are working in the space as we were trying to design and develop a particular tool to be able to go into the university and do the work. The international context, colleagues coming from the global north and how they may have considered as a woman in the global south and countries like Pakistan, and having these ideas that perhaps it's about being oppressed and that it's challenging for them to progress their careers. Very different experience. Now, of course, the group which I was working with are very much in the city, so they're part of the city. They weren't in a very rural area of Pakistan, so it had a different way of thinking and a different outlook. Also, they were professional women as well, so they came from professional families. the other aspect of the case study, which I think is important, is the role of the father and the role of the brothers. The brothers and the fathers really, really were engaging with these women. They wanted the women to do the best they can and not hold them down. So they felt that this was really important. So these young women were encouraged to go to university. They were encouraged to continue to do what they wanted to do, to be able to be the person they wanted to be. Many of the women which we were working with were also outside of, they did lots of Fulbrights. They did Fulbrights, they went to different universities outside of Pakistan. And when you ask them about that, they felt that that was important for them to be able to progress as academics. So I kind of think this is a really important point for this particular webinar about the experiences and how that in itself opened up the discussion. They'd never heard of the word intersectional. Because of the fact that they are all women studying together, they hadn't thought that perhaps intersectional could be looking at generational. So looking at generational, their experiences, looking also around rural women which were coming in to the university and what their experiences were coming from a rural outside of the city to come into the university. The role of the father and the brother was something which brought looking at the family and how family in itself was an intersectional thinking, which we perhaps don't think about that much at all. So I really kind of opened that role with them. Now it was 4 years, the project was 4 years. By the end of the 4 years, they were really confident about how to use the word intersectionality within their research as well, which we will come on to a little bit later. But hopefully that gives you one particular starting point. I think the next one, which I haven't written down, but I think is really important, is the case study of an early career researcher. And what's that really links into the work which we're doing at the moment, which Sophie just mentioned just a moment ago, which is the success stories and challenges faced by early career researchers. Now, I've chosen a particular person here who I think is not somebody which is in isolation, but it is somebody who I think you could resonate to. So I've got a female student receives a scholarship to pursue a doctorate at a leading university in Southeast England, and an accomplishment celebrated by her family and community. And I say that because many of our students who come to UCL are students which are going to come with a scholarship. And if they don't come from a scholarship, they may be funded, they may self-fund, but if they're international, there's a large expense to do. And if they're not, they will also, their family members will help pay for it, because it's quite a commitment. Now, this particular student, like many students which we see, are eager to study issues around gender, issues which align with their home country's equality goals as well. Now, this particular student was enthusiastic to come here and was very enthusiastic about the topic because of the fact that their country really wanted to support them in this particular area. However, the supervisor showed little enthusiasm for the topic, and neither the supervisor and wasn't a gender expert neither. That's something which we're also experiencing. Students have this big expectation when they go to different universities across Europe, thinking that this is going to be, especially if they're coming from a different part, like the global south, they have big thinking that they're going to be coming into a really good experience more than their own hometown. The supervisors they came across were very busy and they left the student feeling very unsupported and isolated. And at times, her confidence declined and her mental health suffered. So that was a major issue. Now, during the field work in the South Asian country, this particular student also encountered misogyny and gender-based violence. Now, they hadn't really understood what gender-based violence was until they came to a workshop for early career researchers and addressed gender-based violence. And that helped her to realise that she did not have to accept such treatment. And this empowers her to seek support and effective supervision to complete their thesis. I give you this case study because it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's not in isolation. We've just run a focus group just this morning before we came to here. And some of these points have already been raised from this morning's discussion with the early career researcher. Now, the field work coming out of this is going to be really, really interesting because it's coming across 5 different countries as well. So some of the key experiences: initial excitement and aspiration. This excitement of wanting to come to whichever country it is and be really excited about it because they've achieved, and they're also, their families are 100% behind them, and look what you're at. Early concerns and supervisor dynamics is something, again, which dampens down a little bit of that excitement. They're not quite sure what to do with it. The emotional impact and decline in well-being is something which this person, which I've described there in the case study, had to work with. The fieldwork challenges, going into the fieldwork and then being faced with misogyny and also no respect as a female researcher, and what that meant, and where's the protection to support them. The turning point, and also empowerment. Yeah.
The next
Yeah,
part.
this is my next bit here. Yeah.
Okay.
So I wanted to just bring a couple of other points as well, which was
So maybe I move there. Part 3.
No, it's still
No.
part 2.
Still part 2.
Yeah. So the other point I wanted to mention as well is the takeaway from these particular case studies, which I think is important. And the main takeaway is in relation to intersectional characteristics and what you've gained from these particular case studies. So the one is lack of diverse expertise in supervisory teams. And I think that's really important to think about. And what I mean by that in itself is the supervisors may not have subject-specific knowledge. It's part 2.
No, now it's part 3. It's supervision.
No, I'm doing something different.
We have enough time, so please go on.
So
definitely, don't worry.
Sorry, so I was saying lack of diverse expertise in supervisory teams, and the supervisors may not have subject specific knowledge, especially in emerging interdisciplinary fields like gender studies, for example. Another point which comes out of these particular case studies, which I mentioned, was unequal power dynamics and how that comes across. This particular student had 2 supervisors, but they were both from the same East Asian part of the world. And this particular student was from a different part of Asia, but there was a difference in power dynamics, how they saw one particular country and against another country as well. So these are things which we don't think about because they're hidden. Inadequate support structures, which when you're thinking about mental health services, academic guidance and fieldwork preparation, are often under-resourced or not tailored to diverse student needs. Institutional invisibility of gender-based violence. Many students don't understand what that means. They experience it, but they don't know what to do and they don't know how to talk about it. And so what do? They suffer in silence. They suffer in silence because they don't know what it is. And it's not until perhaps even year 3, year 4, or even when they've left, when they reflect back, they realize that that's what gender-based violence is all about. But they wouldn't know that because they haven't really been asked to look at it. Another point is cultural and epistemic bias. And research institutions in the global north may undervalue knowledge systems and priorities from the global south. And that's something which comes up quite a lot actually with within students which have come from the global south, and then their knowledge is being looked down on because the global north appear to feel that their knowledge is more equate to what's actually happening. But of course, the global south are the ones, it could be from their country, their context, they know that particular area. Global South scholar or academic may have done a research in there 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but they wouldn't know it as much as the student would have known. So I think this is really important. When I say student, I'm talking about doctoral students. Another point which I don't know how we address this one is about overburdened supervisors. Where the supervisors are, you have to have a certain amount of PhD students to be able to work with, but at the same time, they're all having different needs. And how do you ensure that these particular ones are able to take on some of the challenges which the early career researchers bring to the table as well. And because also they can result in students being left to navigate complex research and institutional systems alone. Through the case studies which we've been working with, or some of the listening to some of the early career researchers in the countries we've been involved with, this is something which has come up a few times already, which is being left to navigate complex research and institutional systems. And finally, which I wanted to do, which I bring out from these case studies, is the limited accountability mechanisms. There are few consequences for poor supervision or neglect. I think that's a really important point to mention. If a postdoc or a early career researcher has poor supervision or neglect, what's the consequence of that? What's the consequence for the supervisor? There seems to be very little. And the feedback systems may not be anonymous or safe for the students to be able to say what's happened in their supervision. It's a tough one. So that's my points at the present moment, which I think opens up hopefully further discussion. But that's the part which I've done, which is around case histories and bringing intersectionality to life, and also success stories and challenges faced by researchers from diverse backgrounds.
So let's move to part 3, challenges and policy implication. And so if I remember well the outline, Verity should introduce different points of discussion.
Yeah, so thank you both. Thank you to both of our lecturers for today, for their amazing presentations, for extremely important insights and discussion points that they have opened here. What we heard during this intersectionality webinar is well aligned with the overall goals of the CCA, especially the working group on gender equity and diversity. And it will help us further structure the remaining deliverables. So right now we are changing pace a bit, and we are turning the table towards the participants. So I will give words to Verity, my colleague from the working group, who will now open the discussion and self-reflection points for the audience. So in order to do that, okay, now everyone should be able to unmute themselves once they have something to say and contribute.
I can confirm that. Thank you very much, Adna. And thank you very much as well to our speakers and Sophie and Victoria. So yeah, we have learned, I think, an awful lot just in this short amount of time about intersectionality, and maybe also the limitations of where we are in a European context, also relative to a global context where maybe we sort of think about European context as being very European, but as Victoria points out, actually there's an awful lot of exchange going on and interconnection with global Souths and global Norths. So how do we think about that then, and how do we bring this into very practical strategies, as we've got noted here, also relative to what Anne-Sophie was talking about, the structural challenges that are possibly based around the fact that we have very little attention being paid to different aspects of intersectionality. And it was certainly something that I think we noticed as we were putting together some of the documentation for our working group, was around this vector, that there was a lot out there around gender and quite a few different elements around different parts to the puzzle, but nothing that really sort of looked at how things could cross and transfer with each other. So we have these three topics here: the structural challenges that persist in our research institutions, the practical strategies that we might be able to think about in order to address the disparities, and then what the implications might be for hiring, mentorship, funding, and career progression. So maybe we could focus this discussion a little bit around these three areas. And I invite now the audience to pose your questions. Maybe if we do some first questions around the actual presentations, and if anybody has any needs for clarification, take a couple of questions on that, and then we'll move into these three discussion points. Are there any questions? If you just want to click on the question request. Are there any questions for clarification? If not, we can move on.
Okay, so maybe to start the discussion, I prepared 2 slides, but I don't know if you prefer that people express themselves before those 2 slides or after, and then we will close the presentation and we will see each other, which is always better.
Let's see if there's any initial questions, and if there isn't anything, then we can go straight to those slides. I think that would be great.
Thank you. So if there is no questions, so
we can go.
So that's yours.
Yeah. Okay, so I kind of started to tackle this at the beginning. So I'm going to just spend a little bit of a couple of moments on structural challenges. So the first thing I've said is about supervision training is not mandatory. And that seems to come up all the time. They are, asked to do training, but it's not mandatory. If they don't do it, no one, there's no accountability of it. This creates a challenge and an unequal power dynamics. I want to just put that one there. The other point as well is mentoring to empower researchers is not provided. I mean, it's getting better, but it needs to be embedded within the culture within the institution where research is being done. Not just left to people to try and devise it themselves, but there needs to be a particular program where it helps them to be able to do this. There's a framework around mentoring. Early career researchers do not have the opportunity to meet all the descriptor requirements for a PhD. And what I'm looking at there is the Dublin descriptor and what that actually means. So it's kind of wide point, really. And for example, the ability to present the research to a non-expert audience. And we talk about that a lot. Our students who are on PhD programs, our PhD students need to be, one of the things they learn, they need to be able to present their research to a non-expert audience. And so what that means is they're able to be clear and concise about what they're doing. The next point which I've got on here is the definition of early career researchers. Now, Anne-Sophie and I have had we've had lots of conversations about this when we first started to do the cost action. What does that mean? Are they talking about somebody who's under the age of 35? Are they talking about people which are just early in their career of researchers? So they could be 55 or 65, but they were early in their career as a researcher. So I think that's really important to have that as a main definition and what that means. And does it reflect, otherwise, how does it reflect reality? And I've said here as example in relation to age. Pass back to you, Anne-Sophie.
Okay, so the next slide about the methodological challenges and the ideas to overcome, and some examples of studies overcoming those methodological challenges in a European context. So, I already mentioned the lack of harmonized data across Europe in terms of collection, definitions and regulation, except for gender, which is the best documented dimension, I would say, but social background, race, or ethnic origin, geographical origin. So no, nationality is also well documented and easy. Age, disability, or sexual orientation, it may vary from a place to another. And in addition, very often you have the different series of data, but the series are not interconnected. And so you cannot work in an intersectional way. Another challenge is if by chance you have data and you have connected data series, if you cross 2 or 3 different dimensions, even 2, you have much smaller numbers. And if 3, even smaller, and again, and so it means that you lose the statistical significance of your data, even at the scale of a university with, say, 40, 50,000 students. You know, you count men and women, and so it's quite easy. But when you start crossing, say, women and disability and full professorship, or you come to very, very small numbers, and privacy issues also. So my recommendations now, IDs, so that's the second part. So the first thing we should do is to use existing data at national level, because there are lots of data, for example, on nationality or age, and we have also gender, and so we can use it, because for the moment some data exist, but it is not used. Then another interesting idea is to mix the quantitative systematic data collection with surveys or qualitative data as life trajectories or case studies. And a good example of that is the work made by EIG, so the European Institute for Gender Equality. They have a gender equality index. And if you look at the different dimensions of this gender equality index, they started to make it intersectional. So it means that they usually have, I would say, hard data and statistical data for gender, and they added a survey on additional dimensions in an intersectional way, and that's very interesting. So depending of the dimension they study, they add different dimensions. So for example, for employment, they will add so you have gender and employment, and they will add the family situation or the social background. And but of course it's so the family situation is collected through a survey, and the rest is from the national statistical offices. But it provides a first insight, which is very interesting. So I wanted also to mention alternative methodologies, not requiring how to say is racial statistical data, or because in many cases in Europe you cannot do it. So 2 interesting projects are one is using testing methodologies. So for example, so there is I think it's, I don't know, maybe it's on my next slide, but for example, if you want to know if racialized students are discriminated when they try to apply for a master degree, so you can have exactly the same application, but with different names. or different nationalities, and you see what are the answers of the institutions and how the applications are evaluated. And so you can really address the discrimination issue. Another study I want to mention is the study Trajectories and Origins, made by the INED, so which is the National Institute for Demographic Studies. And this study was made to try to overcome the fact we have no racial statistics. And so, and the result is really, really interesting. And so I have no time to, but it's partly translated in English, and it's enough to see what can be done without changing the law. So wrap up and engagement. So I think it's our last part. So I will stop the slides here. Stop sharing, and so now we can see each other again, and it's much better. Where is it to stop sharing? Here, yes. And
thank you both very much. There's some really interesting stuff in there. Are there any immediate questions? I know I have a couple. Well, maybe then, while everybody's cogitating on all of that, I was really interested to think about some of those structural and methodological challenges that you were talking about, right from the very start, the supervision training. Now, at a recent Pride conference, we were talking about supervision training, and it's been really noticeable to me that as someone who's been in this domain over the last 15, 20 years, we've shifted in these more sort of doctoral administration, doctoral training conferences. We've shifted from we need to train the supervisors to how do we train our supervisors, which is a really interesting shift, and it's great. It means that there's more and more institutions focusing on this need, and often making it obligatory as well. So I wonder, what do you see as being the content of that training of supervisors to make it really effective and to address these many different issues going on?
I think one of the areas which I think is absolutely fundamental is cultural responsive. Now you could say culturally responsive pedagogy, and I think that would be really helpful to be able to do that. And so they need to be competent in dealing with difference. That's what I'm really thinking about, and I think that's one of the things that should be there. Another one would be that something around well-being and mental health, because of since post the pandemic, there is now a need for, because the supervisors are the kind of the first call for students, and so the supervisors need to be able to spot certain things which are not where they need to be in relation to a early career researcher who is either doing their degree or their PhD, or they've done a postdoc, or they've finished and they're now in their first academic post. So I think they're the two key things I think are really important for training.
That's great, thank you.
I think we had a raised hand from Mandira.
Ah, I didn't see it. There it is. Hello, Mandira. Your question.
I put it down because I was, first of all, Anne-Sophie and Victoria, thank you so much for the very insightful presentations. Some of them were like, bling, 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 like ringing in my head, because I finished my PhD and, lots of ups and downs, and some of the things I recognized. And I wanted to say something that, Asia is a very big continent. So between countries, there are different cultures and animosity and all these things. And something I wanted to say I've been doing this for the last 3 days, something called like a Thriving PI Summit, because I have been thrust into this world with no tools, nothing, no one to guide me. So I've been reading up books because I might have to be in a thesis committee quite soon, and I don't know how to go about it. One of the things I realized is like, giving the tool, just a toolbox, like these are just tools to be implemented is not enough. I think it's important it's like something we say in teacher training is like a toolbox is not outside of oneself. So also dealing with those difficult emotions, like, okay, I have come to this part of like privilege and something, then this power dynamic. I think this is something probably to reflect, because I went through a very bad supervision experience in my PhD, and I had to change institutions. And what you said about accountability, there was absolutely no accountability laid on my supervisors for the damage, to my not just mental health, but physical health. And there was absolutely no accountability, like asked of them or anything. So there was definitely a power dynamic, and it is a dependent relationship. So I think, when you're a dependent relationship, you don't question anything. So that's the suffering in silence. And this, I'm just trying to link it with what I saw in the report. The report that Adna and Verity you sent us, everything is, picture perfectly, crystal clear. One of the things I wanted to highlight was the merit, because merit is being increasingly questioned. It's like, it's not a level playing field. Let's just say during my PhD, I was not encouraged to publish anything because my supervisors were afraid that I would not be able to finish the PhD. Now, I'm sure it's done with good intentions, but then when you apply for funding post-PhD, say, oh, you don't have any publications out of your PhD. Now, I can't just lay the blame on my supervisors that they thought I couldn't finish my PhD. So these are things to be possibly like, I know that one of the things that's taken into account for career progression, for example, is the number of articles you've published. Now, I have some catching up to do with my early career researcher colleagues in Finland. Most of them do article-based thesis, so they already have like a few articles. Yeah. So something, yeah, that's what I wanted to say, like from my side about the reaction. But yeah, so the case study, for example, resonated so much. And I had a very different experience. I had a better experience with the co-educational school and college. I rather thought it was the single sex one, which was, put more obstacles. Because I come from this part of India where there's a lot of toxic femininity. So, women getting together, it's like a queen bee kind of thing. So I've always, and in like, I have to say this, I apologize if it makes some of you uncomfortable, but I still have to say, like, if I compare my experiences in different countries of Europe and Switzerland, I was more supported in my trajectory by white men and more held back by white women and also other women of color. But I had more support from men. I don't know why. Yeah, so this was, yeah. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Mandira. But I think actually that comment kind of points to what you were saying, and Sophia and Victoria, about how we have a preconception of how obstacles might be put in place and oppression might be might operate, when in fact it may look very differently once we're on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. And there is very often a lot of complexities, in fact, depending on the specific national context. So the nationality of the racialized young researcher, and also the national context where he or she studies. And then for example, I have an example, but it's just at the application level. But at the moment, for example, it's much easier if you're from Algeria. it's much easier to come to France for a PhD as a woman than as a man, because women are never suspected to be terrorists. and so they get their visa. And the men, it's very difficult for them because they are always suspected of terrorism, which is quite crazy.
Yeah.
And so it can play in different ways.
No, absolutely, absolutely.
That brings in something else I was thinking about as you were talking. We've been focusing on career development of researchers here. And is there inspiration that we can draw from work that is done in other fields? Even most directly, for example, from HR and recruitment, the work that's done on bias and discrimination in those areas. Or in the case of people coming from, sorry, I'm going to rephrase, or maybe even stop. I'm just going to let you.
I have no answer, but I have another remark. So the fact that the experience of home students who are racialized is not exactly the same as foreign racialized students, because so foreign students may have visa problems or that kind of, so of course the local ones don't have this experience, but on the other side, the foreign students are some very often better considered because they are international students, and it's more prestigious, and very often also their social background is the background of so with many people studying, going to university abroad, and so they have a stronger social background and some prestige because they are international students, so not all the time, but then challenges are slightly different for home students who don't have the visa problems and all that, and they know how the country is working, but they may be discriminated in another way. But we are really at the beginning of our research, because we have not even yet transcribed all the focus groups. So.
Yeah.
It's exciting work.
I'm thinking as well, when we're in conversation with wider networks, such as the EUA, Science Europe, and especially RICO, the observatory created in agreement between the EU and the OECD. What would you, in an ideal world, like to see, especially something like the RICO Observatory, being able to do?
Difficult one.
We're talking ideal world.
I was just thinking, I always think about money and how support can help. I always think about money and how support can actually help. I don't know whether they would be able to do things like that. I offer packages of small sums, because many students, when they start their work, they seem to be okay, but when they want to do some field work, they then they have very little money to be able to do that, to go to where they want to go, because many want to go out the country or they want to do X, Y, and Z. So finding ways of supporting students in their fieldwork stage, I think, is actually quite a useful place. I don't know what could be done, but I'm just thinking, yeah.
So another idea is to solve the visa issues, because it's just an additional burden and additional problems which could be easy to remove. So to promote European status of international student, for example, where you're sure to get, or international and later international researcher, where you're sure to get your papers, and you don't have to struggle with that. I think it could be really good. So I'm sure Mandira agrees with me.
Oh, yes. HR personnel should be better trained, I think. Yes, I was almost like the first year in Switzerland, I was in the University of Teacher Education. The HR said, just come from France to Switzerland, no need for a visa. It's like, are you sure? I think I asked several times and they said, oh, it's just Schengen, it's fine. I come to Switzerland for my first residence permit application and they said, you have to pay a fine because you should have asked for a visa in the Swiss consulate in France. And then because it was a public institution, they kind of found a way to communicate with each other. And the next day there was a different person and they said, okay, well, you speak fluently German and French. We are not going to declare you like, illegal or something, and everything was fine. So yeah, but for a week, I think I didn't sleep well. So this is really, and these are powerful people. So you can't, keep asking them the same question or something. They get angry and they get quite verbally violent quite easily. So not really approachable people. So you can approach them only from some kind of hierarchy. So when you're asking for papers or something, embassies, consulates, migration offices are not, mostly people are not very, it's just their job probably. They see you as just as a number.
Yeah.
If maybe I could just add one comment / question. You mentioned the problem of definition of early stage researcher or early career researcher, and the problem of academic versus chronological age. And this is actually something that Verity and I also discussed to a certain extent when we were preparing the deliverable. So what is your idea on approaching that challenge, how to overcome it? And
in fact, in Voices, we discussed 3 dimensions. So one is the age. So, and then should it be 40, 35, 50? So we can discuss age. Another dimension is the fact to have a tenure track or a tenure position. And so I have some colleagues who consider that once people have a tenure or even a tenure track, then you can discuss again. So you're not a young researchers, an early career researcher, you really started your career. And the last dimension was what you mentioned, the academic age, so the number of years after your PhD. So the PhD is your date of birth, I would say, in the academic world. And so is it 8 years, 10 years? So that, again, you can discuss. And so that there are those 3 dimensions, and what we decided in Voices was, depending on the context, we allowed ourselves to use the different dimensions, because of course, when you want to address precariousness, precarity, for example, so the time to get a tenure or a tenure track position is probably the important thing. So if you so it depends, but age, in some age, at the good thing with age is that you don't have to consider PhD, because you have many people who work in the research sector without having a PhD. So they are engineers, or they are in research support, but in fact, they are employees in the research sector. And if you consider only the academic age, they are completely out of the picture. And you have many women in that case. So depending of what dimension you study, I think you can stick to a definition or another.
Yeah, I agree.
And academic age may be very good for people who had a second career or in disciplines where you get your PhD very late. For example, education. So it's very common to teach for years and at some point to decide to start a PhD, and then you get your PhD quite late. But it's normal in this. Yes, but it's normal in this field, so it's not the same as physics or biology, or depends.
It's all in the nuance, really, isn't it? It's in the details.
So the problem with using 3 different definitions in that, when you want to have to collect data, it's a problem.
It's really complicated. Yeah. I know that in Lausanne we run a career survey 3 years after the thesis, and just the question asking people if they're on the academic career path or not is really complicated.
Yeah.
And I'll leave it at that. We have just 5-10 minutes left on this webinar, and what Adna and I would very much love to do is to get some feedback from everybody who has been attending. And I have just 3 questions, 3 thoughts to present to you. So I'm just going to put them up here. They're on a Mentimeter, with the idea that you can contribute your thoughts already. You should have them in front of you. Is it working?
Yes, it's working.
Wonderful. Okay, so that first question then, what's one insight that you take from this webinar, which I think, if I can speak on behalf of everybody, has been really, really insightful, and I've learned an awful lot. It's not wonderful when you spend an hour and a half and you've learned something. You'll see that as people start to contribute, it'll come up on the screen, and you'll have the option for this one to like any of anybody else's comments. That's the complexity, exactly. And you're right, taking your ideas for granted is very important. Yeah, intersectionality is not used enough. I agree. Disabilities, that's true. Yeah. No, well, let's get rid of that. Yeah, the different experiences. Oops, sorry. I can't have AI on this tool. Broader insights. Yeah, absolutely. Cultural difference. Okay, I'll give a minute there, or 30 seconds more on that. Move on to the next one. And again, if you like anything in particular here, feel free to put a little like on it. I think I'd put a like onto most of everything that's here. Okay, so it's also about practice in this working group. What's one, sorry, this is the insights. Hello. There we go. A commitment. What's one thing having heard of all of these different ideas for how we can move forward in this space, what's one thing you'll do tomorrow or Monday, or maybe next Thursday for those of us who'll be meeting in Brussels, to make a change in your environment? Yes. Listening to individual stories without jumping to conclusions. I think it's lovely. Be a better PI than mine. Not a role model in that case. Be clear and understanding. It's funny, we had a workshop the day before yesterday on active listening. We talked a lot about bias. And that was just with people who work in the area of researcher development, whether they were researcher funding advisors or doctoral administrators. And so many people got a lot out of thinking through these topics of what it is to listen with openness and not jump to conclusions, to listen to the person in where they are right now. It was very, very helpful for a lot of people. Working on your own privileges and your implicit bias, absolutely. Looking to the EU institutions, that would be great. And how to make a change in underrepresented companies. Okay, wonderful. Thank you all very much for your contributions. And finally, the very last thing to ask, sharing resources. Because I suspect there's a lot of people in the audience who know parts to all of this discussion. And I think I seem to remember, Sarah, you already provided a great article that you'd spotted on LinkedIn. It would be great, actually, if you copied it and put it in here too. But do you have a podcast you particularly enjoy, an article that you keep going back to? Website She Figures is not a bad place to start. Articles and podcasts. What kinds of articles? Any podcast in particular that you find particularly helpful? I realize I'm unable to vote, but if anybody wants to put Geraldine Fitzgerald's podcast onto this. Or Vicky Wright's, the PhD life coach. But Geraldine Fitzgerald's podcast, which is, I found it, Changing Academic Life. No, it's wonderful. Okay, well, if there's any more responses that are going to come up, I'll let them upload. In the meantime, oh, there are more. Oh, I'm looking forward to the recording of this webinar to come back to all of this. Okay, we are coming into the last 30 seconds to this webinar, so we will manage it so that people can leave on time. I will offer my thanks to Anne-Sophie and Victoria for your contribution to this webinar, which really made it what it is, really useful and insightful and practical as well, with things to think about. Thanks also to Judith, who was such a help with helping us organize this and publish it. And to my colleague as co-chair of the working group, Adna, thank you also very much for your great collaboration. And over to you.
Thank you, Verity, also for being an amazing co-chair and colleague. Thank you to our speakers. I look forward to seeing you again next time in person, hopefully. So Sophie, see you next week, and Victoria, see you soon as well, hopefully. thank you, Judith, and Coast Association in general for coming up with this collaboration idea, then supporting us with the webinar. We have another one planned for the upcoming period. So actually that's planned for 2026. But I will invite all participants to continue following the whole CCA, including our working group as well. And of course, to get in touch with us if you have any questions, need any additional resources, information about projects, and so on. And with this, I would just like to give words to Judith or our speakers if you have any concluding remarks or goodbyes.
Yes, thank you so much. I'd just like to take a very brief moment of your time to thank, first of all, Adna and Verity for this amazing webinar and for the organization of it. And of course, Victoria and Anne-Sophie as our distinguished speakers. Without you, of course, wouldn't have been possible. So we are very grateful indeed. And not only is this a first CCA deliverable, it also brought together the Voices Cost Action with the CCA very nicely. And I liked the content so very much, and I'm a big fan of the way you presented, and also the way you chose to close this webinar with these Menti questions and giving everyone the opportunity to provide input, because this is actually very useful. And I hope there's a way to come back to these very nice comments that we've heard from the audience, from the participants. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us. It was a pleasure to share deep thoughts.
Yeah, it's good. No, thank you very much for the opportunity, and I hope that you'll come back and ask further information